Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, boys and girls. Happy Thursday, April 15th. As you can see on the board behind me, today we are going to be reading Harry Potter Chapter 11. We know these chapters are long, so let's get right into it. Take a moment and write down here your homework and your classwork. Today we're going to be reading Chapter 11. We will be completing a set of notes of your choice, and we're going to be doing this on notebook page 63. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I scroll down here through our table of contents, you can see that it's getting long. We have to scroll way down, and right here we get to it, page 63, the Chapter 11 notes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here are your directions. They're the same as they've always been. Today, you're going to have the opportunity to choose the type of notes that you want to complete for this chapter. You're going to go to page 42 in your notebook, and you are going to choose what type of notes you want to try. Once you've picked out what style of notes you want to do, go right to the next page in your notebook and begin setting up your notes with the three things every single notebook page needs: the date, the title, and the page number. I'll show you mine so you guys can see. Remember, our notes go on the left side of our notebook, and for the students that are in class, and you guys at home if you want to, you guys always know that you guys can use sticky notes. So if you like using that strategy, make sure that you ask a teacher before you go home on those like A days or B days, so you guys can have sticky notes with you so you can do that style of strategy or note-taking strategy as well. So I'm going to open up here my document camera. While that's opening, I'm going to flip back to page 42. Okay, here is page 42. And today I've chosen to do, for my style of notes, I've been doing a lot of lists recently. I'm going to go back and I'm going to do some Cornell notes. So that's the style that I'm going to pick today. So when I go to page 63 in my notebook, I'm going to set them up with the date, the title, and the page number. So today is the 15th. This is page 63. It is Chapter 11, the Dueling Club. And because I'm doing Cornell notes, you'll see I've added my essential question. And our essential question really is always the same. As we're reading Harry Potter, we're looking at how Harry is a hero. So my question is, how do the events in Chapter 11 align with the hero's journey? Okay, and you can see here I have got my nice big eye set up. So I've got my three sections. I have a section for questions, I have a section for notes, and at the bottom I have a section for a short summary. The summaries that you do in your Cornell notes, they're never the big full summaries with main idea, all of the details, and a reflection. With these summaries, I'm focusing just on the details. All right, and you'll also notice here when I do my Cornell notes, I remind you guys all, we're looking at 8 to 10 bullets, 3 to 4 questions. So go ahead, pause the video now if you need to. Take a moment, set up your notes, and then once you have your notes, open up to Chapter 11. And when you're open to Chapter 11, you guys can go ahead and resume the video. Okay, you can see here I've scrolled down. I've got a lot of discussion questions written for today. And again, we tend to read, take our notes, and we usually save our discussion questions for the very end of the reading. And we also use them at the start of our writing day. So again, if you are watching the videos, I encourage you to join us for the live classes because you will be able to participate in the discussions. And it's really in those discussions where we get a good feel and we're able to really critically think about the chapter. Okay, so back here to my notes. Before we read Chapter 11, we always want to review what happened in the last chapter. So I'm going to take a second and I'm going to turn my notes just for a moment back to Chapter 10. This was the Rogue Bludger. just to remind myself about what happened in Chapter 10. And in Chapter 10, this is the chapter where Hermione, Ron, and Harry begin to get the note so they can get the book to make the Polyjuice potion. Harry has a Quidditch match against the Slytherins, and while Harry catches the snitch, the big thing that happens during the Quidditch match is there's this rogue bludger that breaks Harry's arm. Harry ends up in the hospital wing because Professor Lockhart tried to heal Harry's bones, but instead of healing the bones, he actually instead removed his bones. So Harry goes to the hospital wing to have his bones. He's got to regrow his bones. While he's in the hospital wing, two big things happen in the hospital wing. First, Dobby shows up. He's very disappointed that Harry is still at Hogwarts. We learn that it was Dobby who closed the barrier. It was Dobby who sent the rogue bludger after Harry, all in an attempt to get Harry back home on Privy Drive and away from Hogwarts. We never do learn from Dobby why Dobby wants Harry not to be at Hogwarts so much. Dobby starts to hint at it. There are these terrible things are going to happen, Harry. Terrible things are going to happen. And we already start to see these terrible things happening with the Chamber of Secrets being open. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, has been petrified. And then in the hospital wing, the second scary thing happens, which is that Dumbledore and McGonagall bring in Colin Creevey. And Colin Creevey, you remember, is the first-year student. He's that big fan of Harry. He's always following him around, trying to get pictures of him. Colin is brought in, and Colin has been petrified. And that's where the chapter ends, with Dumbledore confirming to McGonagall the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Students are in danger. And that is how the chapter ends. And so that's where we find our main characters as we begin reading Chapter 11 today. So, Chapter 11 is called The Dueling Club. Let's go ahead and let's get right into it. Harry woke up on Sunday morning to find the dormitory blazing with winter sunlight. Again, I love how J.K. Rowling gives us little hints as to the timeline here. She did it with Halloween. Now we're up to winter time. Harry woke up on Sunday morning to find the dormitory blazing with winter sunlight, and his arm reboned, but very stiff. He sat up quickly and looked over at Colin's bed, but it had been blocked from view by the high curtains Harry had changed behind yesterday. Seeing that he was awake, Madame Pomfrey came bustling over with a breakfast tray, and then began bending and stretching his arm and fingers. "All in order," she said, as he clumsily fed himself porridge left-handed. "When you've finished eating, you may leave." Harry dressed as quickly as he could and hurried off to Gryffindor Tower, desperate to tell Ron and Hermione about Colin and Dobby. But they weren't there. Harry left to look for them, wondering where they could have got to, and feeling slightly hurt that they weren't interested in whether he had his bones back or not. As Harry passed the library, Percy Weasley strolled out of it, looking in far better spirits than the last time they'd met. "Oh, hello, Harry," he said. "Excellent flying yesterday, really excellent. Gryffindor has just taken the lead for the House Cup. You earned 50 points. "You haven't seen Ron and Hermione, have you?" said Harry. "No, I haven't," said Percy, his smile fading. "I hope Ron's not in another girl's toilet." Harry forced a laugh, watched Percy walk out of sight, and then headed straight for Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. He couldn't see why Ron and Hermione would be in there again, but after making sure that neither Filch nor any prefects were around, he opened the door and heard their voices coming from a locked stall. "It's me," he said, closing the door behind him. There was a clunk, a splash, and a gasp from within the stall, and he saw Hermione's eyes peering through the keyhole. "Harry," she said, "you gave us such a fright. Come in, how is your arm?" "Fine," said Harry, squeezing into the stall. An old cauldron was perched on the toilet, and a crackling from under the rim told Harry they had lit a fire beneath it. Conjuring up portable, waterproof fires was a specialty of Hermione's. "We'd have come to meet you, but we decided to get started on the polyjuice potion," Ron explained as Harry, with difficulty, locked the stall again. "We've decided this is the safest place to hide it." Harry started to tell them about Colin, but Hermione interrupted. "We already know. We heard Professor McGonagall telling Professor Flitwick this morning. That's why we decided we'd better get going." "The sooner we get a confession out of Malfoy, the better," snarled Ron. "Do you know what I think? He was in such a foul temper after the Quidditch match, he took it out on Colin." "There's something else," said Harry, watching Hermione, tearing bundles of knotgrass and throwing them into the potion. "Dobby came to visit me in the middle of the night." Ron and Hermione looked up, amazed. Harry told them everything Dobby had told them, or hadn't told him. Hermione and Ron listened with their mouths open. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened before?" Hermione said. "Well, this settles it," said Ron in a triumphant voice. "Lucius Malfoy must have opened the chamber when he was at school here, and now he's told dear old Draco how to do it. It's obvious. Wish Dobby told you what kind of monster's in there, though. I want to know how come nobody's noticed it sneaking around the school." "Maybe it can make itself invisible," said Hermione, prodding leeches to the bottom of the cauldron. "Or maybe it can disguise itself, pretend to be a suit of armor or something. I've read about chameleon ghouls." I'm going to go ahead and underline chameleon. And that reminds me, as I'm reading, make sure that any unfamiliar words, you guys are going ahead and you're underlining them. "You read too much, Hermione," said Ron, pouring dead lacewings on top of the leeches. He crumpled up the empty lacewing bag and looked at Harry. "So, Dobby stopped us from getting on the train and broke your arm." He shook his head. "You know what, Harry? If he doesn't stop trying to save your life, he's gonna kill you." Okay, we have a little bit of a page break. This is a really great time for you guys to stop and write something in your notes. And today, again, I'm not going to go ahead and show you guys my notes as much. I really want to see what you guys are putting in your notes. Okay, think about some of the things that we just learned. Harry, Ron, and Hermione have started to do what? They're brewing the polyjuice potion. What has Harry done? Harry has shared the information that he learned from Dobby with his two allies, Ron and Hermione. So pause the video if you need to, write something down, and then go ahead and continue the video. Okay, I'm on page 234, right after the page break, or the line break. The news that Colin Creevey had been attacked and was now lying as though dead in the hospital wing had spread through the entire school by Monday morning. The air was suddenly thick with rumor and suspicion. The first years were now moving around the castle in tight-knit groups, as though scared they would be attacked if they ventured forth alone. Ginny Weasley, who sat next to Colin Creevey in Charms, was distraught. I'm going to underline distraught, that's a good one. But Harry felt that Fred and George were going the wrong way about cheering her up. They were taking turns covering themselves with fur or boils, and jumping out at her from behind statues. They only stopped when Percy, apoplectic, gotta underline that one, apoplectic with rage, told them he was going to write Mrs. Weasley and tell her Ginny was having nightmares. Meanwhile, hidden from the teachers, a roaring trade in talismans, amulets, and other protective devices was sweeping the school. Neville Longbottom brought a large, evil-smelling green onion, a pointed purple crystal, and a rotting newt tail before the other Gryffindor boys pointed out that he was in no danger. He was a pureblood, and therefore unlikely to be attacked. "They went for Filch first," Neville said, his round face fearful, "and everyone knows I'm almost a squib." Okay, we have another line break, so we know that this is later on. In the second week of December, Professor McGonagall came around as usual, collecting names of those who would be staying at school for Christmas. Harry, Ron, and Hermione signed her list. They had heard that Malfoy was staying, which struck them as very suspicious. The holiday would be the perfect time to use the polyjuice potion and to try to worm a confession out of him. Unfortunately, the potion was only half finished. They still needed the bicorn horn and the boomslang skin, and the only place they were going to get them was from Snape's private stores. Harry privately felt he'd rather face Slytherin's legendary monster than let Snape catch him robbing his office. "What we need," said Hermione briskly as Thursday afternoon's double potion lesson loomed nearer, "is a diversion. Then one of us can sneak into Snape's office and take what we need." Harry and Ron looked at her nervously. "I think I'd better do the actual stealing," Hermione continued in a matter-of-fact tone. "You two will be expelled if you get into any more trouble, and I've got a clean record. So all you need to do is cause enough mayhem to keep Snape busy for 5 minutes or so." Harry smiled feebly. Deliberately causing mayhem in Snape's potion class was about as safe as poking a sleeping dragon in the eye. Potions lessons took place in one of the large dungeons. Thursday afternoon's lesson proceeded in the usual way. 20 cauldrons stood steaming between the wooden desks, on which stood brass scales and jars of ingredients. Snape prowled through the fumes, making waspish remarks about the Gryffindor's work, while the Slytherins sniggered appreciatively. Draco Malfoy, who was Snape's favorite student, kept flicking pufferfish eyes at Ron and Harry, who knew that if they retaliated, they would get detention faster than you could say unfair. Now, as I'm reading, I've underlined some great words here, like diversion, mayhem, feebly, waspish, retaliated, apoplectic, talismans, distraught. Okay? So, again, this is just my reminder to you guys. Make sure you're underlining words, because in a couple chapters from now, we will be having you guys go ahead and do another vocabulary model. So you want to have a lot of good vocabulary words to choose from. Harry's swelling solution was far too runny, but he had his mind on more important things. He was waiting for Hermione's signal, and he hardly listened as Snape paused to sneer at his watery potion. When Snape turned and walked off to bully Neville, Hermione caught Harry's eyes and nodded. Harry ducked swiftly down behind his cauldron, pulled one of Fred's filibuster fireworks out of his pocket, and gave it a quick prod with his wand. The firework began to fizz and sputter. Knowing he had only seconds, Harry straightened up, took aim, and lobbed it into the air. It landed right on target in Goyle's cauldron. Goyle's potion exploded, showering the whole class. People shrieked as splashes of the swelling solution hit them. Malfoy got a faceful and his nose began to swell like a balloon. Goyle blundered around, his hand over his eyes, which had expanded to the size of a dinner plate. Snape was trying to restore calm and find out what had happened. Through the confusion, Harry saw Hermione slip quietly into Snape's office. "Silence! Silence!" Snape roared. "Anyone who has been splashed, come here for a deflating draft. When I find out who did this..." Harry tried not to laugh as he watched Malfoy hurry forward, his head drooping with the weight of a nose like a small melon. As half of the class lumbered up to Snape's desk, some weighted down with arms like clubs, others unable to talk through gigantic puffed-up lips, Harry saw Hermione slide back into the dungeon, the front of her robes bulging. When everyone had taken a swig of antidote, and the various swellings had subsided, Snape swept over to Goyle's cauldron and scooped out the twisted black remains of the firework. There was a sudden hush. "If I ever find out who threw this," Snape whispered, "I shall make sure the person is expelled." Harry arranged his face into what he hoped was a puzzled expression. Snape was looking right at him, and the bell that rang 10 minutes later could not have been more welcome. Okay, this would be a good spot to stop and write something down into our notes. Think again about potions class. What happened in potions? What did Hermione do? And what did Harry have to do? I'm on the bottom of page 238. He knew it was me, Harry told Ron and Hermione as they hurried back to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. I could tell. Hermione threw the new ingredients into the cauldron and began to stir feverishly. It'll be ready in 2 weeks, she said happily. Snape can't prove it was you, said Ron reassuringly to Harry. What can he do? Knowing Snape, something foul, said Harry, as the potion frothed and bubbled. All right, we have another bit of a line break here, so we know this is later on. A week later, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were walking across the entrance hall when they saw a small knot of people gathered around the notice board, reading a piece of parchment that had just been pinned up. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Thomas beckoned them over, looking excited. They're starting a dueling club, said Seamus. First meeting's tonight. I wouldn't mind dueling lessons. They might come in handy one of these days. What, you reckon Slytherin's monster can duel? Said Ron. But he, too, read the sign with interest. Could be useful, he said to Harry and Hermione as they went into dinner. Shall we go? Harry and Hermione were all for it. So, at 8 o'clock that evening, they hurried back to the great hall. The long dining tables had vanished, and a golden stage had appeared along one wall, lit by thousands of candles floating overhead. The ceiling was velvety black once more, and most of the school seemed to be packed beneath it, all carrying their wands and looking excited. I wonder who'll be teaching us, said Hermione, as they edged into the chattering crowd. Someone told me Flitwick was a dueling champion when he was young. Maybe it'll be him. As long as it's not, Harry began, but he ended on a groan. Gilderoy Lockhart was walking onto the stage, resplendent, great word, got underlined that one, resplendent in robes of deep plum, and accompanied by none other than Snape, wearing his usual black. Lockhart waved an arm for silence and called, Gather round, gather round. Can everyone see me? Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Now, Professor Dumbledore has granted me permission to start this little dueling club to train you all in case you ever need to defend yourselves, as I myself have done on countless occasions. For full details, see my published works. Let me introduce my assistant, Professor Snape, said Lockhart, flashing a wide smile. He tells me he knows a tiny little bit about dueling himself and has sportingly agreed to help me with my short demonstration before we begin. Now, I don't want any of you youngsters to worry. You'll still have your potions master when I'm through with him. Never fear. Wouldn't it be good if they finished each other off? Ron muttered in Harry's ear. All right, I'm going to stop here. We should write something down here about the dueling club. Who starts the dueling club? Okay, now on the top of page 241. Snape's upper lip was curling. Harry wondered why Lockhart was still smiling. If Snape had been looking at him like that, he'd have been running as fast as he could in the opposite direction. Lockhart and Snape turned to face each other and bowed. At least Lockhart did, with much twirling of his hands, whereas Snape jerked his head irritably. Then they raised their wands like swords in front of them. As you see, we are holding our wands in the accepted combative position, Lockhart told the silent crowd. On the count of 3, we will cast our first spells. Neither of us will be aiming to kill, of course. I wouldn't bet on that, Harry murmured, watching Snape baring his teeth. 1, 2.
3! Both of them swung their wands above their heads and pointed them at their opponent. Snape cried, "Expelliarmus!" There was a dazzling flash of scarlet light, and Lockhart was blasted off of his feet. He flew backward off the stage, smashed into the wall, and slid down it to sprawl on the floor. Malfoy and some of the other Slytherins cheered. Hermione was dancing on tiptoes. "Do you think he's all right?" she squealed through her fingers. "Who cares?" said Harry and Ron together. Lockhart was getting unsteadily to his feet. His hat had fallen off, and his wavy hair was standing on end. "Well, there you have it," he said, tottering back onto the platform. "That was a disarming charm. As you see, I have lost my wand. Thank you, Miss Brown. Yes, an excellent idea to show them that, Professor Snape. But if you don't mind my saying so, it was very obvious that you were about to do. If I had wanted to stop you, it would have been only too easy. However, I felt it would be instructive to let them see." Snape was looking murderous. Possibly Lockhart had noticed, because he said, "Enough demonstrating. I'm going to come amongst you now and put you all into pairs. Professor Snape, if you'd like to help me." They moved through the crowd, matching up partners. Lockhart teamed Neville with Justin Finch-Fletchley, but Snape reached Harry and Ron first. "Time to split up the dream team, I think," he sneered. "Weasley, you can partner Finnegan. Potter?" Harry moved automatically towards Hermione. "I don't think so," said Snape, smiling coldly. "Mr. Malfoy, come over here. Let's see what you make of the famous Potter. And you, Miss Granger, you can partner Miss Bulstrode." Malfoy strutted over, smirking. Behind him walked a Slytherin girl who reminded Harry of a picture he'd seen in Holidays with Hags. She was large and square, and her heavy jaw jutted aggressively. Hermione gave her a weak smile that she did not return. All right, you guys should stop here. You should probably write something else down. Okay, think. Who does Harry get paired with at the Dueling Club? We could also think what happened between Snape and Lockhart. Those would be two things that I would be interested in having you guys put in your notes. Because now we have Lockhart that starts a Dueling Club. Snape kind of embarrasses Lockhart with their demonstration. And now we have Harry, who is paired with Draco. So I can only guess that something is going to happen between these two. We know that Harry is our protagonist. He's our hero. And we know that Draco is one of Harry's antagonists. Okay, I'm near the top of page 243. "Face your partners," called Lockhart. "Back on the platform and bow." Harry and Malfoy barely inclined their heads, not taking their eyes off each other. "Wands at the ready," shouted Lockhart. "When I count to 3, cast your charms to disarm your opponents. Only to disarm them. We don't want any accidents. 1, 2, 3. Harry swung his wand high, but Malfoy had already started on 2. His spell hit Harry so hard he felt as though he'd been hit over the head with a saucepan. He stumbled, but everything still seemed to be working. And wasting no more time, Harry pointed his wand straight at Malfoy and shouted, "Ricta Sempra!" A jet of silver light hit Malfoy in the stomach, and he doubled up, wheezing. "I said disarm only!" Lockhart shouted in alarm over the heads of the battling crowd, as Malfoy sank to his knees. Harry had hit him with a tickling charm, and he could barely move for laughing. Harry hung back with a vague feeling it would be unsporting to bewitch Malfoy while he was on the floor. But this was a mistake. Gasping for breath, Malfoy pointed his wand at Harry's knees, choked, "Tarantallegra!" and the next second Harry's legs began to jerk around out of his control in a kind of quick step. "Stop! Stop!" screamed Lockhart, but Snape took charge. "Finite incantatum!" he shouted. Harry's feet stopped dancing. Malfoy stopped laughing, and they were able to look up. A haze of greenish smoke was hovering over the scene. Both Neville and Justin were lying on the floor, panting. Ron was holding up an ashen-faced Seamus, apologizing for whatever his broken wand had done. But Hermione and Millicent Bulstrode were still moving. Millicent had Hermione in a headlock, and Hermione was whimpering in pain. Both their wands lay forgotten on the floor. Harry leapt forward and pulled Millicent off. It was difficult. She was a lot bigger than he was. "Dear, dear," said Lockhart, skittering through the crowd, looking at the aftermath of the duels. "Up you go, Macmillan. Careful there, Miss Fawcett. Pinch, it's hard. It'll stop bleeding in a second. Boo." "I think I'd better teach you how to block unfriendly spells," said Lockhart, standing flustered in the midst of the hall. He glanced at Snape, whose black eyes glinted, and looked quickly away. "Let's have a volunteer pair." "Longbottom and Finch-Fletchley, how about you?" "A bad idea, Professor Lockhart," said Snape, gliding over like a large and malevolent bat. We're going to have to go ahead and underline malevolent. "Longbottom causes devastation with the simplest spells. We'll be sending what's left of Finch-Fletchley up to the hospital wing in a matchbox." Neville's round pink face went pinker. "How about Malfoy and Potter?" said Snape with a twisted smile. "Excellent idea," said Lockhart, gesturing Harry and Malfoy into the middle of the hall, as the crowd backed away to give them room. Now, Harry," said Lockhart, "when Draco points his wand at you, you do this." He raised his own wand, attempted a complicated sort of wiggling action, and dropped it. Snape smirked as Lockhart quickly picked it up, saying, "Whoops! My wand is a little overexcited." Snape moved closer to Malfoy, bent down, and whispered something in his ear. Malfoy smirked too. Harry looked up nervously at Lockhart and said, "Professor, could you show me that blocking thing again?" "Scared?" muttered Malfoy, so that Lockhart couldn't hear him. "You wish," said Harry out of the corner of his mouth. Lockhart cuffed Harry merrily on the shoulder. "Just do what I did, Harry." "What? Drop my wand?" But Lockhart wasn't listening. 3, 2, 1, go! He shouted. Malfoy raised his wand quickly and bellowed, "Serpensortia!" The end of his wand exploded. Harry watched aghast as a long black snake shot out of it, fell heavily onto the floor between them, and raised itself, ready to strike. There were screams as the crowd backed swiftly away, clearing the floor. "Don't move, Potter," said Snape lazily, clearly enjoying the sight of Harry standing motionless, eye to eye with the angry snake. "I'll get rid of it." "Allow me," shouted Lockhart. He brandished his wand at the snake, and there was a loud bang. The snake, instead of vanishing, flew 10 feet into the air and fell back to the floor with a loud smack. Enraged, hissing furiously, it slithered straight towards Justin Finch-Fletchley and raised itself again, fangs exposed, poised to strike. Harry wasn't sure what made him do it. He wasn't even aware of deciding to do it. All he knew was that his legs were carrying him forward as though he was on casters, and that he had shouted stupidly at the snake, "Leave him alone!" And miraculously, inexplicably, the snake slumped to the floor. Docile, wow, there's just a lot of great words here. Docile as thick black garden hose, its eyes now on Harry. Harry felt the fear drain out of him. He knew the snake wouldn't attack anyone now, though how he knew it, he couldn't have explained. He looked up at Justin, grinning, expecting to see Justin looking relieved, or puzzled, or even grateful, but certainly not angry or scared. "What do you think you're playing at?" he shouted, and before Harry could say anything, Justin had turned and stormed out of the hall. Snape stepped forward, waved his wand, and the snake vanished in a small puff of black smoke. Snape, too, was looking at Harry in an unexpected way. It was a shrewd and calculating look, and Harry didn't like it. He was also dimly aware of an ominous muttering all around the walls. Then he felt a tugging on the back of his robes. "Come on," said Ron's voice in his ear. "Move! Come on!" Now, I just want to point out, on these 2 pages alone, here are some of the words I've underlined, because these are great words. Aghast. These are on 246. Aghast, brandished, casters, and at the very bottom of 246, leading into page 247, inexplicably. And then on page 247, I've got docile, shrewd, and ominous. So on these 2 pages alone, I've been able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 great vocabulary words. So again, just want to remind you guys, make sure that you are underlining these words as we're reading them. Okay, I'm near the bottom of page 247, the last paragraph. Ron steered him out of the hall, Hermione hurrying alongside them. As they went through the doors, the people on the other side drew away as though they were frightened of catching something. Harry didn't have a clue what was going on, and neither Ron nor Hermione explained anything until they had dragged him all the way up to the empty Gryffindor common room. Then Ron pushed Harry into an armchair and said, "You're a Parselmouth? Why didn't you tell us?" "I'm a what?" said Harry. "A Parselmouth," said Ron. "You can talk to snakes." I know, said Harry. "I mean, that's only the second one. It's only the second time I've ever done it. I accidentally set a boa constrictor on my cousin Dudley at the zoo once. A long story. But it was telling me it had never seen Brazil, and I sort of set it free without meaning to. That was before I knew I was a wizard." "A boa constrictor told you it had never seen Brazil?" Ron repeated faintly. "So," said Harry, "I bet loads of people here can do it." "Oh no, they can't," said Ron. "It's not a very common gift. Harry, this is bad." "What's bad?" said Harry, starting to feel quite angry. "What's wrong with everyone? Listen, if I hadn't told that snake not to attack Justin..." "Oh, that's what you said to it?" "What do you mean? You were there. You heard me." "I heard you speaking parcel tongue," said Ron. "Snake language? You could have been saying anything. No wonder Justin panicked. You sounded like you were egging the snake on or something. It was creepy, you know." Harry gaped at him. "I spoke a different language? But I didn't realize. How can I speak a language without knowing I can speak it?" Ron shook his head. Both he and Hermione were looking as though someone had died. Harry couldn't see what was so terrible. "Do you want to tell me what's wrong with stopping a massive snake biting off Justin's head?" he said. "What does it matter how I did it, as long as Justin doesn't have to join the Headless Hunt?" "It matters," said Hermione, speaking at last in a hushed voice, "because being able to talk to snakes was what Salazar Slytherin was famous for. That's why the symbol of Slytherin House is a serpent." Harry's mouth fell open. "Exactly," said Ron. "And now the whole school's going to think you're his great-great-great-great-grandson or something." "But I'm not," said Harry, with a panic he couldn't quite explain. "You'll find that hard to prove," said Hermione. "He lived about 1,000 years ago. For all we know, you could be." And here we have a line break, and so now is a really good time for us to stop. You guys are going to want to add several things to your notes. So pause the video, write down things if you've not already written them down. Again, think about Harry being paired with Draco, what happens? Draco casts a spell that shoots a snake at Harry. Harry then talks to the snake in a language called parcel mouth or parcel tongue. So Harry speaks a whole nother language. And everybody thinks that Harry was telling the snake to attack Justin. Especially Justin. That's what he thought. And ultimately, Ron and Hermione tell Harry, this is bad. And it's bad because Salazar Slytherin could talk to snakes. This is not a common thing. Most people cannot talk to snakes. But that's what Salazar Slytherin was famous for. So these are things that you guys should have in your notes. And again, I want you guys to write down your notes. I'll show you my notes when I'm done reading so you can see the kinds of things that I put in my notes. But here I'm telling you, these are the kinds of things that you want to add to your notes. So take a moment, pause the video if you need to, write in your notes, and then resume the video. Okay, I'm on the very bottom of page 249. Harry lay awake for hours that night. Through a gap in the curtains around his four-poster, he watched snow starting to drift past the tower window and wondered, could he be a descendant of Salazar Slytherin? He didn't know anything about his father's family, after all. I mean, the Dursleys had always forbidden questions about his wizarding relatives. Quietly, Harry tried to say something in parcel tongue. The words wouldn't come. It seemed he had to be face to face with the snake to do it. But I'm in Gryffindor, Harry thought. The Sorting Hat wouldn't have put me in here if I had Slytherin blood. Ah, said a nasty little voice in his brain. But the Sorting Hat wanted to put you in Slytherin. Don't you remember? Harry turned over. He'd see Justin the next day in herbology, and he'd explain that he'd been calling the snake off, not egging it on, which, he thought angrily, pummeling his pillow, any fool should have realized. Here in that short little section, we get a good glimpse of Harry's internal conflict, where Harry is worried. Harry's worried that somehow maybe he is the heir of Slytherin and he doesn't know it. He doesn't know anything about his family. He doesn't know anything about his father or his mother's family. And so Harry is thinking, maybe I am the heir of Slytherin. After all, the Sorting Hat wanted to put me in the Slytherin house. Bottom of page 250. By next morning, however, the snow had begun in the night, had turned into a blizzard so thick that the last herbology lesson of the term was canceled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation she would entrust to no one else, now that it was so important for the mandrakes to grow quickly and revive Mrs. Norris and Colin Creevey. Harry fretted about this next to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, while Ron and Hermione used their time off to play a game of wizard chess. "For heaven's sake, Harry," said Hermione, exasperated, as one of Ron's bishops wrestled her knight off of his horse and dragged him off the board. "Go and find Justin if it's so important to you." So Harry got up and left through the portrait hole, wondering where Justin might be. The castle was darker than it usually was in daytime because of the thick, swirling gray snow at every window. Shivering, Harry walked past classrooms where lessons were taking place, catching snatches of what was happening within. Professor McGonagall was shouting at someone who, by the sound of it, had turned his friend into a badger. Resisting the urge to take a look, Harry walked on by, thinking that Justin might be using his free time to catch up on some work, and deciding to check the library first. A group of Hufflepuffs, who should have been in herbology, were indeed sitting at the back of the library, but they didn't seem to be working. Between the long lines of high bookshelves, Harry could see that their heads were close together, and they were having what looked like an absorbing conversation. He couldn't see whether Justin was among them. He was walking toward them when something of what they were saying met his ears, and he paused to listen, hidden in the invisibility section. "So anyway," a stout boy was saying, "I told Justin to hide up in the dormitory. I mean to say, if Potter's marked him down as his next victim, it's best if he kept a low profile for a while. Of course, Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let slip to Potter he was Muggle-born. Justin actually told him he'd been down for Eton. That's not the kind of thing you bandy about with Slytherin's heir on the loose, is it?" So again, here is clear confirmation that the Hufflepuffs believe Harry is the heir of Slytherin. "You definitely think it is Potter, then, Ernie?" said a girl with blonde pigtails anxiously. "Hannah," said the stout boy solemnly. "He's a Parselmouth. Everyone knows that's the mark of a dark wizard. Have you ever heard of a decent one who could talk to snakes? They called Slytherin himself Serpent Tongue." There was some heavy murmuring at this, and Ernie went on, remembering what was written on the wall. "Enemies of the heir, beware. Potter had some sort of run-ins with Filch. Next thing we know, Filch's cat's attacked. That first year, Creevy was annoying Potter at the Quidditch match, taking pictures of him while he was lying in the mud. Next thing we know, Creevy's been attacked." "He always seems so nice, though," said Hannah uncertainly. "And, well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. He can't be all bad, can he?" Ernie lowered his voice mysteriously. The Hufflepuffs bent closer, and Harry edged nearer so that he could catch Ernie's word. "No one knows how he survived that attack by you-know-who. I mean to say, he was only a baby when it happened. He should have been blasted into smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that." He dropped his voice until it was barely more than a whisper and said, "That's probably why you-know-who wanted to kill him in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. I wonder what the other powers Potter's been hiding." Harry couldn't take it anymore. Clearing his throat loudly, he stepped out from behind the bookshelves. If he hadn't been feeling so angry, he would have found the sight that greeted him funny. Every one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though they had been petrified by the sight of him, and the color was draining out of Ernie's face. "Hello," said Harry. "I'm looking for Justin Finch Fletchley." The Hufflepuffs' worst fears had clearly been confirmed. They all looked fearfully at Ernie. What do you want with him?" said Ernie in a quavering voice. "I wanted to tell him what really happened with that snake at the Dueling Club," said Harry. Ernie bit his white lip and then, taking a deep breath, said, "We were all there. We saw what happened." "Then you noticed that after I spoke to it, the snake backed off," said Harry. "All I saw," said Ernie stubbornly, though he was trembling as he spoke, "was you speaking Parseltongue and chasing the snake towards Justin." "I didn't chase it at him," Harry said, his voice shaking with anger. "It didn't even touch him." "It was a very near miss," said Ernie, "and in case you're getting ideas," he added hastily, "I might tell you that you can trace my family back through 9 generations of witches and warlocks, and my blood's as pure as anyone's, so—" "I don't care what sort of blood you've got," said Harry fiercely. "Why would I want to attack Muggle-borns?" "I've heard you hate those Muggles you live with," said Ernie swiftly. "It's not possible to live with the Dursleys and not hate them," said Harry. "I'd like to see you try it." He turned on his heel and he stormed out of the library, earning himself a reproving, good word, glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing the gilded cover of a large spell book. Okay, again, this would be a good time for you to stop, write something down about the Hufflepuffs. How do all the Hufflepuffs react to Harry? Harry blundered up the corridor, barely noticing where he was going. He was in such a fury. The result was that he walked into something very large and solid, which knocked him backward onto the floor. "Oh, hello, Hagrid," Harry said, looking up. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered balaclava. Underline balaclava. But it couldn't possibly be anyone else, as he filled most of the corridor in his moleskin overcoat. A dead rooster was hanging from one of his massive gloved hands. "All right, Harry?" he said, pulling up the balaclava so he could speak. "Why aren't you in class?" "Cancelled," said Harry, getting up. "What are you doing in here?" Hagrid held up the limp rooster. "Second one killed this term," he explained. "It's either foxes or a blood-sucking bugbear, and I need the headmaster's permission to put a charm around the hen coop." He peered more closely at Harry from under his thick, snow-flecked eyebrows. "You sure you're all right? You look all hot and bothered." Harry couldn't bring himself to repeat what Ernie and the rest of the Hufflepuffs had been saying about him. "It's nothing," he said. I'd better get going, Hagrid. It's Transfiguration next, and I've got to pick up my books." He walked off, his mind still full of what Ernie had said about him. Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let slip to Potter he was Muggle-born. Harry stamped up the stairs and turned along another corridor, which was particularly dark. The torches had been extinguished by a strong icy draft that was blowing through a loose window pane. He was halfway down the passageway when he tripped headlong over something laying on the floor. He turned to squint at what he'd fallen over and felt as though his stomach had dissolved. Justin Finch Fletchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a look of shock frozen on his face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. And that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure, the strangest sight Harry had ever seen. It was nearly headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky, floating immobile and horizontal 6 inches off the floor. His head was half off, and his face wore an expression of shock identical to Justin's. Harry got to his feet, his breathing fast and shallow, his heart doing a kind of drum roll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the deserted corridor and saw a line of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were the muffled voices of teachers from the classes on either side. He could run, and no one would ever know he had been there. But he couldn't just leave them lying there. He had to get help. Would anyone believe he hadn't had anything to do with this? So stop here, write something down. What does Harry stumble over in the hallway? Okay, he stumbles and he trips over Justin Finch Fletchley, who is just like Mrs. Norris, who is just like Colin Creevey. And not only is it just Justin, but there's also nearly headless Nick. And both of them look like they have been petrified. And so now Harry is thinking, I could run. Nobody else would know that I was here. I could just run. All right? But he says, no, I got to stay and I have to help. That's what Harry says. I've got to do something to help them. So here I am on middle of page 257. As he stood there, panicking, a door right next to him opened with a bang. Peeves, the poltergeist, came shouting out. "Why, it's Putty Wee Putter!" cackled Peeves, knocking Harry's glasses askew as he bounced past him. "What's Potter up to? Why is Potter lurking?" Peeves stopped. Halfway through a mid-air somersault, upside down he spotted Justin and nearly headless Nick. He flipped the right way up, filled his lungs, and, before Harry could stop him, screamed, "Attack! Attack! Another attack! No mortal or ghost is safe! Run for your lives! Attack!" Crash, crash, crash. Door after door flew open along the corridor and people flooded out for several long minutes. There was a scene of such confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people kept standing in nearly headless Nick. Harry found himself pinned against the wall as the teachers shouted for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom still had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a loud bang, which restored silence and ordered everyone back into their classes. No sooner had the scene cleared somewhat than Ernie the Hufflepuff arrived, panting on the scene. "Caught in the act!" Ernie yelled, his face stark white, pointing his finger dramatically at Harry. "That will do, Macmillan," said Professor McGonagall sharply. Peeves was bobbing overhead, now grinning wickedly, surveying the scene. Peeves always loved chaos. As the teachers bent over Justin and Nearly Headless Nick, examining them, Peeves broke into song. "Oh, Potter, you rotter, oh, what have you done? You're killing off students, you think it's good fun." "That's enough, Peeves," barked Professor McGonagall, and Peeves zoomed away backward, with his tongue out at Harry. Justin was carried up to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinistra of the astronomy department, but nobody seemed to know what to do for Nearly Headless Nick. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured a large fan out of thin air, which she gave to Ernie with instructions to waft Nearly Headless Nick up the stairs. This Ernie did, fanning Nick along like a silent black hovercraft. This left Harry and Professor McGonagall alone together. "This way, Potter," she said. "Professor," said Harry at once, "I swear, I didn't." "This is out of my hands, Potter," said Professor McGonagall curtly. They marched in silence around a corner, and she stopped before a large and extremely ugly stone gargoyle. "Lemon drop," she said. This was evidently a password, because the gargoyle sprang suddenly to life and hopped aside as the wall behind him split in two. Even full of dread for what was coming, Harry couldn't fail to be amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase that was moving smoothly upward, like an escalator. As he and Professor McGonagall stepped onto it, Harry heard the wall thud closed behind them. They rose upward in circles, higher and higher, until at last, slightly dizzy, Harry saw a gleaming oak door ahead, with a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. He knew now where he was being taken. This must be where Dumbledore lived. And that's where the chapter ends. Okay, right now you guys should all finish up. Write something down in your notes about what happens with Harry and all the rest of the students again, finding Harry again at the scene of the crime, and where McGonagall takes Harry at the end of the chapter. Okay, pause the video if you must. Alright, the last thing that I really want to do is just share with you guys now my notes and some of the things that I put into my notes. Now again, I did Cornell notes, so I'm going to have maybe less details than if you were to do a list, because I also have questions. So there are times that I would stop and write a question. So here are the main things that I have in my notes. Harry's ally, Hermione, steals ingredients to make the Polyjuice Potion. Lockhart starts a dueling club. Harry duels Draco, who casts a snake at Harry. Harry can talk to the snake, and Ron informs Harry that he must be a parcel mouth. Now, students really think Harry must be the heir of Slytherin. Next, Harry then finds Justin and Nearly Headless Nick petrified in the hallway. The other students catch Harry at the scene. Ernie says that Harry was caught in the act this time. The last thing that I could add is McGonagall takes Harry to see Dumbledore. That probably is something that I should add to my notes. Alright, and again, because I did Cornell notes, I have questions. I also have a brief summary written here at the end. Alright, so now, ladies and gentlemen, here are some discussion questions for you guys to really think about. And hopefully you should be able to answer these or think about these questions. So I'm going to read them to you now to leave you with these to think about. And lastly, of course, you guys know you need to upload a picture of your notes. But here are some great questions to think about from today's reading. Think level 1. Who steals the ingredients to make the polyjuice potion? Why do you think that person really wants to make the potion more than others? Now, we know it was Hermione that stole the potion ingredients. And if you think, why does she really want to make this potion? We know it's that Hermione, she's Muggle-born. So she is the kind of student who is in real danger from this monster. Who starts the Dueling Club? Who does Harry get paired with at the Dueling Club? Draco uses a spell on Harry at the Dueling Club. What does that spell do? What's a Parselmouth? That's an important one. If you were Ron or Hermione, how would you react to Harry being a Parselmouth? This, to me, is one of my favorite questions here, because Ron really knows that a Parselmouth is bad. It is bad to be a person who can speak to snakes. And so, Harry's best friends, really, Harry is best friends with Ron and Hermione. They both find out that Harry has this very scary skill. So, instead of putting you in Harry's shoes in this question, I'm putting you in Ron or Hermione's shoes. And I'm asking you that if you were Ron or Hermione, how would you react to Harry being a Parselmouth? Who do the students at Hogwarts believe is the heir of Slytherin? That's pretty obvious from the Hufflepuff conversation. Who does Harry find petrified? Again, these are a lot of level 1 questions that hopefully should be right in your notes. And this is also a really good question. I love this question. This is a level 3 question that I end with. Harry is misjudged in this chapter. Have you ever been misjudged like Harry? What was it over, and how did it turn out? Okay, we know, at least we should know, that Harry's not doing this. Harry is not the heir of Slytherin. He himself worries that perhaps that is, but we know by reading here, nothing is happening that tells us that Harry is the heir of Slytherin. And everybody is misjudging him. They think Harry is the one that petrified the cat. Harry is the one that petrified Colin. Harry is the one that petrified Nearly Headless Nick and Justin Finch Fletchley. But we know that it wasn't Harry. So this is a case of Harry's being misjudged. And so we take this idea of Harry being misjudged. Have you ever been misjudged? Has anybody ever misjudged you? And just asking, what was it over and how did it turn out? Some of you might say, no, never been misjudged. And others might be able to say, yeah, I was misjudged. I remember one time as a young boy, I must have been around in 5th or 6th grade, that my mother thought that I had done something that I didn't do. And I know that I didn't do it, but my mother thought that I did it, and I got grounded for a week because she thought that I did this thing. And to this day, I still remember that moment, and I will still tease my mom about it, and I will still tell her, you punished me for this thing, but I never did it. My mother basically, she thought I had said a bad word, and I didn't say the bad word. I don't even remember what the bad word was, but I just remember being punished for using bad language, and knowing to this day that I never said anything bad, that my mother misheard me. I don't know what she heard or what she thought I had said, but I got grounded because it was very clear in my house that we didn't use that kind of language. And again, still to this day, I give my mother a little trouble over this, and I tell her, that you punished me way back when I was little over this thing that I never did. So that's just an example of this answer to this question here. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, this if you've been with me this entire time, again, you know that was a 30-page chapter that we just read, and it did take us an hour to get through the entire reading, all of our notes. The last thing that you guys have to do for me is go right over here to our Google Classroom, go to the Chapter 11 notes, and make sure that you guys upload a picture of your notes for me. All right, the next time I see you, we will be writing about Chapter 11. We will do a quiz, and we will be doing the 45-second summary challenge. So until then, guys, have a great night, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.